Welcome to the Truth in the Arena podcast. Today we are going to do a little bit of role reversal. My name is Scott Charland. I will be your host, and our normal host, Nate Huffstutter, is going to be our guest. So we are going to learn a little bit about our normal host today. So the shoe is officially on the other foot. So Nate, I am going to welcome you to the Truth in the Arena podcast.
Thank you very much for agreeing to do this, Coach Scott. And one of the things we always talk about with athletes and coaches is you should be willing to do the things you asked your athletes to do. So I should also be just as willing to answer the questions that I ask my guests. So excited to do this.
Yeah, me too. I'm really looking forward to this. And just to get a little bit of your background, you're a performance coach, a soccer coach, a softball coach, marketing and branding specialist, freelance journalist. You are an editor for some of the books we've all read. Just give us a little bit about your career path through the performance and really just in more general coaching profession.
Sure. So I began out of college in the journalism, writing, art, and literature world and was pursuing a creative career, and then ultimately had children of my own, and the creative career was not particularly lucrative, even though it was rewarding. And so started to look for different ways to make sure that the kids that I had, who cared a whole lot more about having shoes and a place to live and regular meals than if I had just crafted the world's greatest sentence. So started to pivot towards some more practical things in my writing, which led to working with the Omega Wave blog and working on their social media and being involved in the performance world that way. And then kind of parallel to that, my own kids began playing recreational sports, and I got into coaching that because they were, coaches are all volunteers and people are busy, and coaching wasn't necessarily the world's greatest. And instead of being a complainer, it's like, all right, well, then I'll go in and I'll start coaching some of these sports. And that sort of snowballed into a moment in time where I had an older daughter who was very good at both softball and soccer, and both sports pushed specialization pretty heavily, and she had a lot of friends who were very athletic who also had that same issue in their lives in terms of competitive coaches wanting them to be all in on one sport all year round, and that wasn't something that they wanted. And so again, my makeup is to not complain about things, it's to find solutions to things. And so to help people in the community find a solution to this issue of how do we play multiple sports in a competitive environment, I created a multi-sport program at the soccer club that I was at that time volunteering for, and turned that into something where multi-sport athletes were able to play soccer through half of the year during the soccer season and then be relieved of any team obligations for 6 months out of the year. And during that time, they played softball or they played volleyball or they did another sport and had that ability to kind of bounce between them and grow as athletes. And then out of that, became a paid professional coach via the soccer club, and that career route started that way. And kind of simultaneous to that, moving from Omega Wave, shifted over to working for Simply Faster and 1080 Motion, which then led to creating my own company where now I consult for multiple sports technology companies in that same marketing and brand building space. And sort of both rails of the things that I do have kind of constantly overlapped with each other and become, kind of this overall interest in the coaching world and providing this track for young athletes while also working in the sports space.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when you said you're coaching youth sports, I had to chuckle because as a strength coach, I was like, I coach all day long. Like, I'm not going to coach my kids' teams, that someone else is going to have to do that. And then, I drop my son off at basketball practice and they play knockout for a half hour. And I'm like, next season I'm coaching this. Like, I can't watch this anymore.
Absolutely.
It
And it's changed a lot over the lifetime that I've been involved. When I first started in youth sports, there was actually like a process for trying to become a coach, and there was, people would vie for the coaching roles, and they would send in a resume, and they would say, "This is why you should pick me," and I want to do it. And even if you didn't have that much experience, then maybe you would only be an assistant coach in the sport, and that volunteerism has dropped off, and that level of interest among parents and seems to have dropped off to the point where when I left the recreational sports world, pretty much if you were willing to show up, you got it. Like that was the main coaching requirement
you can
was,
pass a
can you show
background
up
check.
at the field, whether you have any experience or not?
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, transitioning to why we're here today, as the host of this podcast, what was your motivation to start the Truth in the Arena podcast? We're all busy. We got plenty of stuff to do besides adding anything else to our plate. What was the motivation to start the podcast?
I think the seeds of it really were planted in the lead up to the 2024 election, where within my professional network and within the social media area that I work in, I was seeing, many coaches that I respect sharing a lot of outrage bait kind of propaganda content, which again, we can have very, very different ideas of where tax money should be spent. We can have very, very different ideas of foreign aid. We can have different ideas of border security, different ideas of the military, and those things are all fine. But it was a little bit shocking to me to see people credulously sharing things from libs of TikTok and end wokeness and other types of accounts that are really only meant to divide and outrage people, and to see that, for me, like, can't you tell that you're being led by the nose to something that is toxic? And so I was kind of seeing that, and at the time, my natural reaction to that was to withdraw from it. It's like if you guys are all going to be sharing this stuff, I'm just going to, tune that out. And then we got to the inauguration in January 2025, and immediately Trump started rolling out the Project 2025 agenda, and very quickly started implementing things that I thought were, coaches should be able to stand up and say, hey, if you're erasing Jackie Robinson from government websites, if you are insulting Canadian citizens and threatening Canada, these are things that we should be able to say, absolutely not. This is not being done in our name. And you want to be able to say that, in these moments, especially for people who have kids, like, yeah, I did not allow this moment to pass and just, keep my head in the sand and, hold on to my one little thing.
Right.
So from those seeds then came, hey, like, can we at least talk about these things in the coaching world? And again, it doesn't have to be about the things that we can totally disagree about in terms of fiscal policy and government policy and all of these things. But there are a lot of very, very basic things that as coaches, we train or we instill these teamwork principles and these selflessness principles in our athletes that are completely counter to the way that the current government administration is being run. And we should be able to use our voice and say, absolutely not. And by encouraging that, hopefully, you can get a little bit more collective action. I tell my players all the time that communication is contagious, and if there's only one player on the field using their voice, sooner or later that player is going to stop. Like, it's hard, but if everybody on the field makes that a regular habit, and they're talking and they start with small compliments and they start with little things, man on, I got ball, all of those little bits of communication become habitual, and then everybody's able to talk and everybody's able to do that usefully. And it takes some people being willing to stick their neck out and be the first ones to do it. So I'm usually willing to be the first one to stick my neck out and do things. And so there we are.
Well, I appreciate you sticking your neck out and doing this podcast. It is a lot of work, and having these voices be heard is very important. So what have you learned? There's, I think, 10 or so episodes released. By the time this comes out, it might be up to 15 episodes. What have you learned from this experience so far, and kind of what the guests have shared with you?
I think what I've learned the most is actually how much I enjoy hearing from the other coaches and how much I enjoy the conversation process. And in like the current environment, so much of communication is done via text. So much of what we see of people are, micro content. You see a 60-second reel of somebody on Instagram, or you see a tweet, or you see a little bit, and you get these bits and pieces of people. But instead, during these conversations, and then there's a conversation that happens before we record the episode, and there's something that happens after the episode. And that part of actually communicating with somebody on topics that aren't the easiest necessarily for everyone to discuss, maybe not things that everybody really wants to discuss publicly, that has been very, very valuable to me. And it's independent of any entertainment value. And I'm not sure that there's ever going to be a huge audience of people that wants to sit and listen to 45 minutes or so of coaches talking back and forth, and that's okay. I'm not really here to entertain. Again, it's kind of, can you lead by example? Can you start having these conversations? And if more people are willing to engage in conversations about racism, more conversations about what it means to have the current immigration policy that we have, dehumanizing people who happen to be in the country illegally, all of these things, there's a value there way, way, way beyond any actual entertainment value that the episodes may or may not provide.
Yeah, I agree. And there's however many performance podcasts, they're not rare. But to your point,
Right.
I listen to the podcast to learn more about the coach, and what their background was, what their beliefs are. And this is a great podcast to do that. How many sets of bench press they do, I really could not care less. I want to know the person. And I think your podcast does a great job of getting to know the person the coach on a personal level, more than just what they do in the weight room. Let the other 1,000 performance podcasts do that, but to really get inside of that coach and their personal ideas is interesting to me. The first question you always ask when you're on the podcast is, what are the motivating principles and values that you're looking to most instill in the athletes that you train? So I'm going to, lead you with that one. What are those principles that you're looking to instill in the athletes that you train?
Sure. So the very first principle that I want to instill in the athletes that I coach is to be where your feet are. And I exemplify that by repeating very, very often the phrase, the journey is the reward. And that's very important in the youth sports world these days, because so much of the fact that, there's a lot of money involved, there's a lot of ambition involved, and people can get the idea that, well, hey, I'm playing sports because I want to make this other team down the road, or I'm playing sports because I want to see if I can get a college scholarship, or I'm playing for this downstream reason that you're trying to achieve, and you're willing to be maybe miserable in the moment. And it's okay if my coach is yelling at me all the time because maybe I'll get into college, or it's okay if I don't like any of my teammates because maybe then I'll be on a team that I will like all of my teammates, or something like that. And so I constantly try to instill in my players that, this moment is the thing that you're doing. This is the value that you're getting. And we just did a goal setting exercise with one of my highest performing soccer teams yesterday. It's full of multi-sport varsity athletes, players who are going to play 2 and 3 varsity sports at very, very competitive high schools here in San Diego. And I asked them directly, what is your why? What makes you come to the field every single day? And to a girl, their why is, I love to come to the field and see my friends. So All right, like that's
That's
the
awesome.
thing. So making that something that they want to be a part of, and Tony Holler has distilled that down to, make practice the best part of a kid's day.
Mhm.
And I believe in that wholeheartedly, that if you can create that environment that makes them want to show up every day, then that is the value. So first, being where your feet are and enjoy the process, because that is a habit that will take you through the rest of your life as well. You have to enjoy the process of what you're doing. You don't want to have a job that you hate. You do it for 10 years because maybe there's something that you'll get at the end of it. You have to enjoy the process of the things that you're doing. And then the next big value that I like to try to instill is one of selflessness.
Mhm.
And that in the decisive moment, when you can choose what's right for you as a person versus what may be right for the team, sometimes what's wrong for you as a person is the thing that's what's right for the team, and you have to choose the thing that's right for the team but maybe wrong for you. And there are all kinds of examples of that throughout sports, in just in simple ways. In soccer, am I going to take this low percentage shot, or am I going to pass it off to my teammates so they can be the one to score? This girl's about to hit a rocket shot on goal, am I going to stand in front of it and block it? That's going to hurt, but I'm going to keep my team from scoring even though it does hurt. Maybe I want to go out on a Friday night with my friends, and that's going to be super fun for me, but we have an early game. Instead, I'm going to make the choice of doing what's right for my team. And if you can continually make that choice of being willing to sacrifice what feels right for you, but do what's right for the team instead, you can get something greater than that individual moment. And
Mhm.
that's then kind of the next part of, if you are where your feet are, and if you are willing to sacrifice, you can create a sense of connectedness. And via that connectedness, you are able to achieve something where you are greater than the sum of your parts. And that feeling of a successful team where the team is greater than the sum of its parts can only happen with kind of those first two values coming. And that sense is something that kids will take with them, and again, hopefully take with them into their greater life, that you can be part of something bigger if you are willing to appreciate the process. If you are willing to make some sacrifices, those things will come back to you.
Awesome. Yeah. No, that's great. And that's going to tie into, how do these motivating principles shape what you look for in political leadership? And, your second one was selflessness. And they always say Republicans vote for themselves, Democrats vote for other people. So how do these motivating principles shape, what you look for in political leadership?
So, unfortunately, those motivating principles are a struggle for political leadership because they're not necessarily what work in today's environment. So when I go to the field and there's an umpire at the softball field or the referee for the soccer game, what I want to do is show up, shake their hand, have 3 or 4 minutes of casual conversation before the game where we get along really well, forget about them completely for the duration of the game, and then afterward thank them for a very well done job because I didn't have to realize that you were even part of the game.
Hmm.
And as soon as the umpire or the referee is materially impacting the game, then they're not doing the job that I think they should be doing. And it's kind of similar in terms of the politicians that I respect the most. I would love to see you in your campaign, vote for you, and then not see you for 2 years. Like, I don't want to have to be involved in what you are doing. That's why I voted for you. I have a job. I have things that I need to be doing, not keeping tabs on you. That's the whole part, the whole reason for the political process that we have, is that each citizen can't make each decision on their own. So we delegate them to someone else to do them.
Hmm.
Now, within the current political environment, the people who quietly go about doing their job as that umpire that you don't notice, they get voted out because they're not on social media constantly, they're not trumpeting their own experiences constantly, they're not in your face constantly. And people then don't realize that, hey, this person was quietly effective for this amount of time, whereas this person was in my social media feed all the time, so I know who they are. So that again, like the political leaders that I do like the most tend to have that quiet efficiency on one side, and then I do like the ones on the other side who are the ones who are at least willing to stick their neck out and say, all right, hey, I'm going to stand up. This is not okay. This is not what we're about. I am going to draw a line right here, and I don't care what the consequences are, because the consequences of not drawing the line are worse than the consequences of getting by but having not stood up for what I believe.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think when we were younger, or maybe not as paying attention to it, we would love, hey, politics is over there. I don't really get into politics. I just trust that they're doing their thing and looking out for me. And then there's some kind of event that comes along and it's like, what in the world is going on here? So, what was the event, or was there a singular event that made you start paying greater attention to politics, and maybe like, hey, where I used to, I want this umpire to just not be a part of this game, but then they're getting so involved, and it's like, now I got to start paying attention to what you're doing. So was there an event that made you get more involved in politics and have to look at things a little closer? Just sharing briefly, for me, was without a doubt, for me, it was Sandy Hook. And at this point, I was, 35 years old, but I had a son who was in kindergarten the same year, though, that Sandy Hook massacre happened. And I could not imagine sending my precious, innocent little son to school one day and him not coming home. And naively, I thought, well, there's been Columbine, there's been mass shootings at the mall and the movie theater, but this is the event that's finally going to force politicians to have to put a ban on automatic weapons and really come down and do some things that are going to change this, because no way can anybody let kindergartners be slaughtered. And nothing changed. Like literally nothing changed. So I started looking into this. How in the world is nothing changing? Oh, well, the NRA buys off all these politicians. Oh, well, all the money in politics. Oh, the corruption in politics. And then I was like, all right, now I got to start paying attention to this more. I just want to worry about, should I front squat or back squat? Now I got to start paying attention to this whole political realm. So was there an event like that got you looking deeper into politics?
Early on when I was in college, I was part of a disputed election. I'd gone to vote for county supervisor, and it was one of the men running for the supervisor was a beloved professor at UC Santa Barbara, where I was going to school, and he was running against an old oil money guy, and it had come down to like 36 votes, and I was one of the disputed votes. I'd gone to the place that I voted the previous election. They didn't have me on the voting rolls. I said, hey, am I in the right space? No, you're in the right place. Let me give you a provisional ballot. Filled out my provisional ballot, submitted it, and then it was going to get thrown out because technically I should have been at a voting precinct a couple blocks away. And so had to go to court, and the poll workers were there, and I'm there, and they're fighting over whether this vote's going to count. And that sunk into me in that moment that, all right, like, this is important. And no matter what was happening in my life in the intervening 30 some years, at a minimum, I made sure that every election I was going to read the entire voter pamphlet. I was going to vote for the candidates that I thought best represented either me or represented themselves, and put forth a good effort. And that's where that started. And then the next, kind of the cataclysmic moment for me was definitely when Donald Trump got the GOP nomination in 2016, where it was kind of that meteoric shock of, all right, like, this is a human being who doesn't represent any positive qualities. And how is it that an entire political party has given themselves over to somebody who so transparently lacks the character to be a leader? And so that is suddenly, you have like a kind of an internal thing of, all right, what's a threat in my life? And instead of politics just being something that occurs around you,
Hmm.
the willingness to install somebody with no positive character traits and mostly negative character traits, it's a direct threat. And so now I have to really pay like constant attention to this, because this is not just, the Bush administration. This is not just the Reagan administration. This is a completely different thing and a whole different level of internal threat. And so just like anything, when you recognize that like there's that direct threat, then you just have to pay a closer amount of attention to it, and to make sure that you're protecting yourself against what you recognize as something that does threaten like your way of life and the things that are important to you. So that is when I started to pay a lot more direct attention to what was happening in the political realm.
Yeah. And I think that kind of leads into, I'm going to skip around to questions here, one later down the road. And you always ask, how do you maintain a healthy media diet and vet information? And I think that goes back to your Trump getting elected in 2016, because all the media said is, there is no way this guy's going to get the Republican nomination. And then there's no way he's going to beat Hillary Clinton. Look at the polls. She's up 6, 8, 10 points. Like, the Republican Party isn't even putting money into the presidential nominee anymore. They're going to the down ballot races. And boy, could they not have been more wrong. Just assuring us that there was no way in the world this guy was going to be president. And after that, me personally, myself, I had to start looking for other outlets of information, because the mainstream media just absolutely whiffed. So, what advice, or I'm sorry, how do you maintain, a healthy media diet, but also not just, get on one side of the political spectrum or the other? Because you do have to take in, you got to know what the other side's thinking. How do you go about your media diet that way?
So, first is having a healthy media diet. And we recognize very immediately like what an unhealthy diet is. And if somebody's living on caffeine, vodka, and cigarettes, you can say that that's not healthy. Don't do that. And yet there are people who have the equivalent of caffeine, cigarettes, and vodka as their media diet. So first of all, like, don't engage in nothing but toxic media, because that's going to wear you down. And at the same time, you'll have to be aware of, as I mentioned, this kind of threat that you feel. Part of that is the flood the zone with shit model, which puts so much out there that the natural instinct is to then be like, well, I don't want to swallow all that shit, so I'm not going to pay attention to that, which is how then that machine works. And so you have to like have some feet in there so you're aware of what's going on around you. In terms of keeping like a very balanced media diet, part of it is being willing to read authors and writers from other political spheres. So, I do follow and read things from the New Republic or other traditional right-wing conservative writers, and see like where that perspective is coming from. And it's still a journalistic perspective, and it's people who have been traditionally conservative, and they miss as much as the mainstream media, because they still do believe that the movement is founded on these free market capitalism and limited government principles that no longer exist. But at the same time, like, you're getting that type of perspective. And then the other important part of a media diet is something that Tyler Germain mentioned in the last episode that we did, is just understanding who the speaker of the content is and what they want. And if the speaker of a piece of content wants to inform you of something, they want to to provide information to you, then you can see if other sources are looking to provide similar information to you, and you can start to kind of triangulate towards a certain amount of truth. Or is the speaker of or the creator of the content trying to change your behavior in a certain way, and are they trying to, inflame you about the Easter egg roll that Joe Biden had, and say that this is somehow the most anti-religious moment in the world, and trying to get you to not vote for Joe Biden by making you angry on Easter. Like, all right, maybe I can think about what this person is doing when they're sending out these messages on this holiday. Why are they trying to make me angry on this holiday? That shouldn't be the case. So, okay, then you can kind of read between the lines and behind and say, all right, this is not, a credible or valued source of information. Where can I go and find it? And then ultimately, like anything, like any diet, the important thing is variability, part of which is by eating a lot of different things, you get different nutrients. And part of it is because you don't necessarily know what's going to help you in the moment. But if you have like a very, very balanced diet, then different things can provide different energy sources, and different things may provide different vitamins and nutrients. And the same thing with your media diet. If you're as versatile and diverse as you can possibly be in what you consume, then you're going to pick up little bits. And even like my oldest daughter is a soccer junkie, and she loves European soccer. And part of what I consider a healthy media diet is sitting down and watching a Premier League soccer game with her. And you can say, well, it's just watching a soccer game. Well, it opens up conversations about the world, because we're watching European soccer players play, and she's looking into, all right, then she's following the different kinds of contracts and how they're moving, what different countries, and all of a sudden you have a little bit more of a global perspective just based on having something that is healthy in your media life, and trying to get outside of a little narrow window with that. So my recommendation for anyone would be to be as diverse as possible, to recognize when there's a toxicity in your media diet. And again, one of a true life hack is disconnecting from the internet at times, and being out in nature, and putting the phone away, and putting this source of information away, and then finding that healthy balance between, well, I want to put my phone away and I just want to be present in the moment, but you still need to be aware of what's going on around you.
Yeah. For the coaches out there that don't want to sift through the, all the websites, all the newspapers, this and that, on a daily basis, is there kind of one news source or anything, website or YouTube channel that you go to kind of, hey, this has been filtered down, I think, pretty well? Is there any, hey, we all used to read the USA Today and the local newspaper. Local newspapers almost don't exist anymore.
Right.
I don't even know if the USA Today has a print version anymore. When you're checking the news for the first thing in the morning to see what, disaster we have to avoid, what are you going to?
I wish I could say that that thing existed. But it's like, you see kind of the coach who's telling people how they do their meal prep for the week, and they cook 7 breasts of chicken and put them in with a scoop of white rice, and that's what they're gonna eat 7 days out of the week. And I'm like, that's not great. It's better than nothing, but that's not great. And it's the same, like if there's one source that you go to. And for years, I did subscribe to the Washington Post, and I like the Washington Post. And then obviously, there has become a motivation for them to not get on the wrong side of the Trump administration. And Jeff Bezos has projects that now he is more motivated to get in front of regulators, which dictate editorial policy there. So it's not quite as much of that, hey, go there for your national news. But I still do read the Washington Post, I read the Atlantic, I read the New York Times, I check in on my local newspaper so I see what's being reported in the San Diego Union Tribune, and that has good local coverage. And part of it, again, is kind of having a healthy network of people who share things that you trust. And so, my parents are retired and they love to read as many periodicals as they can, and they send me gift links. And that's like part of a healthy diet is, all right, what are two 75-year-olds in Oregon reading? And then I make a point of reading what they send me. And yeah, that's part of like family connection and appreciating that they wanted to send something, but also part of, okay, here's a perspective, and I'm going to read what they send. And then my kids will send a link of something they found on Instagram, and I'll be able to say, whoa, 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 that ain't it. And then we can have that discussion of like why the thing that they're reading was was biased or faked or whatever. And then, ultimately for all of us, as these sort of, institutions break down, and the thing that doesn't occur anymore is the kid with a bicycle riding down your neighborhood and hitting your front door with the newspaper, and that's all you had to do was open your front door, there was your newspaper, and you could feel like you were, informed of the news for the day. It doesn't exist anymore. And now it requires a little bit more critical thinking and a little bit more hustle and wherewithal to actually sort through things. But that's actually, a useful and valuable skill, and it will be a valuable skill for everybody over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years is, can you sort through the information that's being presented to you, and can you recognize what's legit? Can you recognize what has actual real truth to it, and can you recognize what's trying to lead you by the nose to something that's not healthy for you, but you are the object of a sale or of something else?
Yeah, so like you mentioned with the chicken and the rice, a healthy nutritional diet comes from a variety of sources. And same thing, you got to have a variety of sources and sift through the information. And just a funny story where you mentioned your kids and they send you something and you're like, no way, that's true. I came home from working out a couple of weeks ago and walked through the front door, and my wife, 50 years old, master's degree, smart woman, she told me, did you see that Caitlin Clark is dating Barron Trump? What do you think about that? And I said, Tanya, are you out of your mind? What are you talking about? And she was dead solid convinced that Caitlin Clark was dating Barron Trump because of, probably was on Facebook. She's, of the Facebook age. And I was just like, we had that little conversation again about, hey, you got to have a little BS detector when this stuff is going on. But she was sure of it. So just, it can happen to anybody. It really can. We think this is just for, some Appalachian rube in Kentucky that, can hardly read, but we can all fall prey to these things. All right, if you could change one policy in the United States, you were king for a day and could change one policy, what would that be? How would you make our lives all better?
You actually already hit it. If I could change one thing with the snap of my fingers, it would be to ban assault rifles and automatic weapons. And I don't think anything would be better for our national character than to tell our kids that we're not going to allow you to be in a situation where somebody can shoot a bunch of kids consecutively, and then we're not going to do anything about it. Because we can tell our kids that we can regulate diving boards in backyard pools, and we can regulate what kind of angle ramps have to be, and like all of these little things that we can regulate the speed limit on this street versus this street, but we cannot regulate weapons of war in our community. I mean, that's just the easiest no-brainer in the world would be, look, hey, you want to keep a handgun locked under your bed for self-protection? Great, go for it. You like to hunt and you feed your family with that food? That's awesome, go do it. You find target shooting to be something that focuses you? Hey, go and target shoot. Keep your gun at the gun range and do that. Those things are fine, but obviously, like, just sensible gun laws would be number one, and then you kind of indicate again, why is this the case? And that would then be, how do you overturn Citizens United and get the flood of dark money out of politics? Because that's where it all comes from. And the way that the Supreme Court is able to be corrupted by money, the way that senators and congressmen are able to vote on things that they have stock in, whether it's energy stocks or private prisons or defense stock, all of that. And just at like the most basic level, we realize that that's not something that ethical people can do. You know, in our soccer club, we have just a very basic common sense rule that we know that kids like to get private lessons from coaches. The coaches cannot give private lessons to kids on your own teams. Why wouldn't you be able to give a private lesson to a kid on your own team? Well, you dictate their playing time. So if you dictate a kid's playing time and they're paying you 50, 60 bucks an hour, 100 bucks an hour, then you all of a sudden have a conflict of interest because you want to show their parents that your sessions are being effective, so I'm going to play this kid more. Or you have kids who aren't playing very much, but you offer private sessions. Well, then the parents will think, well, hey, the way to get more playing time is to give this coach 60, 70, 80 bucks for an hour, and that'll get us in. And on just like the simplest level, you know, we're talking about playing time in a youth sports game. We're talking about 60, 70, 80 bucks. We know that that colors decision making. And yet then we're talking about things that truly matter to the entire country, and tens, thousands, millions of dollars. We know that you can't make decisions when that kind of money is involved, but because of the Citizens United decision and other things around it, we allow that much money to impact the decision making of our political leaders.
You're telling me that getting an airplane from a foreign country is going to cloud somebody's decision? Come on, man.
Well, the thing is actually that I'm not 100% sure that it will. The one thing about Donald Trump's corruption is that I think he's also willing to double cross everybody once they've given him the thing. So the thing that bothers me about his corruption is that it's normalized by the people who vote for him. Like, they accept it. They get angry about any expenditure that may help, you know, a sick kid in another country, but $1 billion to retrofit a plane, yeah, that's fine. That's par for the course. But I think written into like all of the people who think they're buying access to the White House via cryptocurrency, you know, that's a big buyer beware, because I think he's just going to take their money and not do the thing that they thought that they were getting for it, because that's how he rolls.
Yeah, I gotcha. I think one of your best questions is, you know, what is your definition of patriotism? And I love hearing the different guests answer this. So right back at you. What is your definition of patriotism?
So I like asking that question because, you know, sometimes you ask questions because you know like what you think the answer is or should be, and you want to see if they're confirming it. And for me, I ask that question because I don't know. I don't have like a particularly good definition, and I'm interested in hearing like from each guest how they kind of narrow it down and how they define it. And I mentioned earlier on that like my original out of college entree into the world was into the world of journalism and literature and art. And throughout the 20th century, countless writers were trying to grapple with that question and write the great American novel and see if they could actually like capture what is the American character, what makes us Americans. And it was an effort that was often doomed to failure because there was a vastness of it and a real struggle with trying to capture everything. And in those great American novels, they often, they found something of the grandeur of the entire breadth of the country and what it means to have the mountains and the beaches and the deserts, and something of how many different types of vibrant communities existed within the country, whether it was the buzzing of the cities and each city having its own character, and then the small towns each having their own character and the big spaces in between them, and something about the highs and lows of American life where you did have this ability to rise high and fall low. And some of those things were kind of part of that effort to define the national character. but it was always a struggle for writers to really pin down. And that to me kind of gets to the root a little bit of, what it means to be an American. And, for me personally, I would, kind of localize it to, the part of the Declaration of the Independence, which isn't necessarily a national document, although it's, part of the founding of, all men are created equal, and all men are invested with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And those aren't bounded. It's all men, all people. And all people doesn't necessarily mean that you happen to send your federal taxes to the same entity that my federal taxes go to. So there's a coach at my soccer club who I'm close with and who I think the world of, happens to be a Canadian citizen. At no moment does the fact that he happens to be a Canadian citizen and I'm an American citizen impact anything versus, like, hey, you don't have quite this sense of kinship with me that I would have if you were an American. So that part of it doesn't necessarily always ring to me, that because we happen to have the same citizenship is not the most important thing to me. It's really more of, kind of the shared values. And again, when you think about, where does the country, where does Americanness come from? It's certainly not from whoever happens to have the levers of government at the moment. At this time, the U.S. government is engaging in a not quite soft but nearly full war with the state of California, in terms of like putting troops on the street, in terms of creating threats to the leadership. So whose side are you on? Are you on the side of the state of California? Are you on the side of the national government that's threatening the state of California? And again, for me, it's always going to be, I side with those who are trying to insist that government, and that's governments plural, not necessarily just the U.S. government, respect that right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Everybody has those things, and then they come into direct conflict. So my right to the pursuit of happiness and your right to the pursuit of happiness, at some point, well, hey, they may intersect, and one of us is going to have to sacrifice, step back a little bit and say, all right, we're going to compromise in this moment. The thing that I want to do and the thing that you want to do can't both be done at the same time. So you do your thing and I'm going to take a step back, but then there'll be a moment where I get to do my thing and you take a step back, and we can respect each other in that. But again, how do you actually turn that into a national identity is for me, like, it's a big struggle to really then say that, yes, we are connected in a certain way, just because there is that, hey, we happen to send our federal taxes to the same federal government, and that means that somehow there's this kinship, because again, it's not automatic. And where does your kinship come from? If you are wearing a mask and chasing somebody down in a Home Depot parking lot, and the person you're chasing down has been in this country raising a family and working hard for 20 years, and we get into that classic ethical dilemma, you can only save one person. Well, am I saving the American in a mask chasing down the immigrant in the Home Depot, or am I saving the hardworking guy who's been raising his family for 20 years? That's no decision for me. It's very, very easy for me to say, I'm saving the guy who's been working hard for his family. I don't care that we both happen to be Americans. We're not brothers. Like, if you're doing that, we ain't brothers. So that's a challenge then, right? Because you're trying to say, like, who are we as a country? And for me, it really comes down to your values as a person, irrespective of your citizenship.
Yeah. Nah, really good stuff. So as we finish up here, this is the Truth in the Arena podcast, and that we all know that in the arena quote, it's not the critic who counts, it's the man in the arena that's actually doing the stuff. What advice would you have for coaches who want to get in the quote unquote political arena, or have said, hey, enough is enough with this of masked ICE agents chasing down people and these kind of things? What advice do you have for coaches on productive ways to kind of get in the arena and maybe advocate for change and let their voices be heard? And just, not maybe like you and I, where we dive into the deep end of the pool with this whole thing, but hey, how can they get their toe wet? How can they start, advocating for the things that they believe in?
First and foremost, it would be to be willing to take a risk and walk through your fear. If you may be completely disinterested in politics, in which case, hey, that is who you are, and that's fine. Like there are a number of people who are like, I do not care, and that's okay. There are people who care, but are afraid to use their voice, and are afraid that if they say something, it'll either be perceived negatively, or it'll cost them followers, or it may impact their job, or whatever. And as coaches working with athletes in sport, we constantly push them to take a risk. And we say, like on the soccer field, you will hear coaches constantly saying, be brave, be brave. And that means being willing to go into a hard tackle. It means being willing to use a skill move that may not work. It's constantly be brave, be brave, be brave. And then in your own life, if you have that moment where you're like, hey, I would like to speak out against this, whether it's immigration policy or the way that DEI is under attack, or any other thing that you think is an issue that you want to speak out against, then be brave and follow that buffalo through the storm meme, and be willing to go through it, because that is where you are actually going to find the value in your life. And you went back to my motivation for starting the podcast, and all of those things cross my mind. Whenever I come up with something that I want to do, there's then the common sense part of my brain. There's the inspiration part that says, hey, go do this. And then the common sense part says, maybe this isn't a great idea. Maybe there are future sports tech customers and clients who won't like that you were doing a political podcast. Maybe there will be followers that you have on Instagram and Twitter who will drop you. Maybe this or that. And then, okay, so now I've got that countervailing fear. Then wake up again and say, actually, I really should do that. And then, maybe you shouldn't. And in those moments in my life when I have that, I should do this, and then have a chance to kind of reflect on, all right, what's the reason that I'm thinking I shouldn't? And if the reason that I'm thinking I shouldn't isn't, hey, that's actually a bad idea. I've thought about it, and it's actually not a good thing to do. If the reason I'm hesitant is fear, then I have to do it, because the idea of not doing something that I thought I should do because I was afraid to do it, that outcome is worse than any type of failure or consequence. I want to live my life fearlessly. And if any of those consequences occur, somebody chooses not to use me as a marketing consultant, so what? And somebody unfollows me on Twitter, so what? And so far, none of those things have actually occurred. So what I would suggest again to any coach is, if you have that moment where there is that, hey, I would like to be willing to say this is not okay, or I would like to be willing to say this is what I believe and I think this is important, then start there and just be okay saying it. And I think, you look back on just like a little movie like A Bug's Life, where everybody realizes that if you're in a big group and you're fearful, then you can be manipulated. But if you're in a big group and you're willing to use your voice, you're powerful. And that's one of the simple things that I mentioned of my motivating principles is teaching my players that individually people can manipulate you. Individually, people can use you for what you're good at. Individually, you can be like picked off. But if you hold together as a group and have that connectedness, you're super, super powerful. And so, find that. And I would say the same thing to any coach listening who is interested in finding that way to use your voice, is just walk through that fear, and you will probably feel better about having walked through the fear and saying what you want to say, whatever the consequences may be.
Yep. And it can be hard, but as we know, the hard decision and the right decision are usually the same. So, Nate, thank you so much for your time today and inviting me to interview you and ask these questions that we've heard you ask with so many guests. Thank you so much for doing this, and look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for agreeing to be the host for the day, Scott. Appreciate it very much.
Anytime.